Welcome to the Quantum AI Coach podcast. I'm Gina, founder of Virtual World Coaching Academy.
What if the reason you haven't hit your revenue goals this year isn't because you're doing something wrong, but because your nervous system actively views a larger bank account as a literal threat to your survival?
I mean, it completely flips the script on how we view ambition.
Right.
Right? We're so conditioned to believe that, more effort just automatically equals more reward.
Which brings us to the core of today's deep dive. Welcome. We have a genuinely paradigm-shifting set of notes to unpack for you today. It's titled The Currency of Coherence. And this material, it dives into a massive frustration that so many professionals and entrepreneurs face. You probably know the feeling. You've meticulously optimized your sales funnels.
Oh, yeah, you've spent weeks polishing your marketing scripts.
Exactly. You are putting in more hours than you ever have before. And yet your revenue or your career progression, it just keeps slamming into the exact same invisible ceiling.
And the usual response to hitting that ceiling is to look outward. You assume your strategy is flawed. You tell yourself, I need a better ad campaign or a more aggressive networking strategy, or, I just need to grind out a 12-hour day instead of a 10-hour day.
But the thesis of these notes suggests something entirely different. The author argues that if you're stuck in this loop, you do not have a strategy problem, you have a capacity problem.
Which is a much quieter, much deeper issue to address, actually.
Yeah, let's define what we actually mean by a capacity problem. Because a great way to visualize this is to think about your laptop or like your smartphone. Imagine all of those modern business strategies you're trying to implement.
The complex funnels, the high-ticket sales models.
Right, all the aggressive scaling tactics. Imagine those as high-tech, state-of-the-art software. You can go out and buy the absolute best, most expensive software in the world, but if you try to run that shiny new 2026 application on a hardware operating system from, 2012, what happens?
Well, the fans start spinning out of control. The battery drains in 10 minutes, the screen freezes, and eventually the whole system just crashes.
Right. The hardware simply cannot process the demands of the software. And in this context, the hardware is you. It's your physical, internal nervous system. The source material argues that when there's a mismatch between your new ambitious goals and your old internal operating system, you experience a phenomenon called an unconscious reset.
Yeah, and the unconscious reset is fascinating because it usually looks like terrible luck or self-sabotage. But it's incredibly predictable.
How so?
It's that sudden, inexplicable wave of friction that happens right before you're about to scale or right before you break through to the next level of success. You are right on the edge of a huge win, and suddenly you pick a massive fight with your spouse.
Oh, wow.
Or you completely ghost a major client because you just, quote-unquote, forgot to hit reply. Or you suddenly lose your voice the morning of a major keynote.
Okay, let's unpack this because I struggle with this idea a bit. I understand the concept of self-sabotage, sure. But if I'm offered a $20,000 contract, my prefrontal cortex, my logical brain, knows that money pays my mortgage, it buys me a vacation, and it secures my future. Are you saying my biology just overrides that basic logic and forces me to hit the delete button on the email? Why would anyone unconsciously sabotage making more money?
Well, because your biological system doesn't care about your mortgage or your vacation. It cares about energy preservation. The notes introduce a crucial reframe here. Your energy, not your capital, not your time, is actually your hardest financial asset.
Wait, energy is the asset?
Yes. When you push for success using sheer willpower and hustle, you heavily deplete that energy asset.
So the system registers an energy deficit.
Right. And when your energy is chronically depleted, your unconscious mind looks at the next level of success, not as a reward, but as a compounding threat. It calculates that, hey, you do not have the energetic capacity to sustain the current level, let alone a higher one.
Oh, I see.
So it initiates the reset to bring you back to an energy expenditure level it knows you can survive.
Okay, I follow the logic of energy preservation. But how does this actually work on a biological level? How does a perceived lack of energy translate into me suddenly making a terrible business decision or ghosting a client?
To answer that, we really have to look at the science of heart-brain coherence. The notes heavily reference the research of Dr. Roland McCready at the Heart Math Institute. They don't just theorize about this stuff. They physically measure the communication happening between the heart and the brain. Specifically, they look at heart rate variability, or HRV.
Heart rate variability, meaning the tiny millisecond changes in the time interval between your heartbeats?
Yes, exactly. And what HeartMath discovered is that your heart isn't just pumping blood, it's actually an information processing center.
Wait, really?
Yeah, it sends more neurological signals to the brain than the brain sends to the heart. And the primary pathway for this is the vagus nerve.
The vagus nerve is like the body's superhighway, right? It connects the major organs straight up to the brainstem.
Precisely. Now, when your internal state is chaotic, say you're operating from a place of scarcity, or you're terrified of failing on this new contract,
Which happens a lot.
right? Your HRV becomes erratic and jagged. The heart sends an erratic, chaotic signal up the vagus nerve.
And where does that signal go?
It goes straight to the amygdala, the fear center of the brain. The amygdala receives this chaotic signal, assumes you're in physical danger, and initiates a fight-or-flight response. And here is the critical part that answers your question about ghosting the client.
Okay.
When the amygdala triggers fight or flight, it literally restricts blood flow to the prefrontal cortex.
The prefrontal cortex being the part of the brain responsible for complex problem-solving, long-term planning, and logical business strategy.
Yes, the part of your brain that knows the $20,000 contract pays the mortgage is taken offline.
That's wild.
Your higher cognitive functions are impaired. You literally cannot make a strategic decision because your biology is prioritizing immediate survival. So you make chaotic, reactive decisions instead. You ghost the client. You pick the fight. You reset.
Which perfectly explains why working harder doesn't fix the problem. If you're frantically trying to force a breakthrough, you're generating more internal chaos. You're sending more erratic signals to the amygdala. You are essentially pouring gasoline on a fire while trying to build a house.
Exactly. And this leads to a phrase in the text that serves as a major paradigm shift. The author states that you have to increase your capacity to hold the frequency of wealth.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting. Frequency of wealth. Are we talking about quantum physics here, or is this some kind of manifestation metaphor? Because, I mean, that sounds a little woo-woo compared to the hard neuroscience we were just talking about.
I know, it sounds esoteric. But in the context of the HeartMath data, frequency is quite literal. It refers to the rhythmic, coherent frequency of your heart rate variability.
Ah,
A coherent HRV is a smooth, sine wave-like rhythm that tells your brain, hey, we're safe. When your nervous system is in that coherent frequency, your prefrontal cortex stays fully online. You can perceive opportunities, handle complex negotiations, and manage larger sums of money without triggering the amygdala. That coherent biological state is the frequency the author is talking about.
that makes so much more sense. It's a biological state of safety, not a magic vibration. And the notes mention that because of this biological reality, revenue is actually a lagging indicator.
It's the ultimate reversal of how we're taught to pursue success, really. We assume that if we just get the money or hit the revenue goal, then we'll finally feel calm, safe, and secure. But the biology dictates the exact opposite. You have to establish the coherent frequency of safety first, and then the money can sustainably show up and stay.
Because if the money shows up before the nervous system feels safe, the body treats the money as a threat and resets. Which brings me to the nervous system safety settings. The text says the brain can unconsciously associate wealth with deeply negative things.
It goes back to whatever programming your nervous system absorbed about what constitutes a threat. For some, the brain associates high levels of success with hierarchy.
Meaning, if I become the boss, I become the villain, or I become isolated from my peers.
Exactly, or it's an association with instability.
Right, the idea that the bigger the business I build, the more catastrophic and painful the fall will be when it inevitably fails.
Or even a fear of losing your identity. If your entire self-worth has been built around being the scrappy, undervalued underdog fighting against the system, who are you if you suddenly become the wealthy, well-resourced industry leader? The brain views the loss of that core identity as a survival threat.
It's like a surge protector. I mean, we usually use a thermostat analogy for the nervous system, but a surge protector feels more accurate here. If too much voltage, in this case, too much success, too much visibility, too much money, hits a system that isn't wired to handle that level of current, the breaker automatically trips to prevent the house from catching fire.
The surge protector analogy perfectly captures the suddenness of the unconscious reset. The system shuts down to save itself. And the crucial takeaway for you listening is this. When that breaker trips, you aren't failing. Your system is actually successfully doing its job to keep you safe based on its current wiring.
Do the notes give us an example of what this looks like in someone's actual life? Because understanding the vagus nerve and the surge protector is great, but I want to see how this hidden survival mechanism actually impacts a real person's bank account.
Yeah, they provide a brilliant case study using a framework created by Lisa Bloom called The Story of Who.
What is the Story of Who framework?
It's a narrative coaching structure designed to uncover the hidden unconscious character that is actually driving your business decisions. It looks past the what you're doing and focuses on the who you are being when you do it. Using this framework, the text introduces us to a client named Sarah.
And Sarah's situation is the textbook definition of a capacity problem. The notes describe her as deeply intuitive, highly creative, and not afraid of hard work.
Oh.
But every single year, despite launching new programs and hustling, her income would flatline at exactly £2,000 a month. Every single year.
She wasn't starving, but she was entirely stagnant. £2,000 was her invisible ceiling. No matter what new marketing software she tried to run, the hardware crashed when it hit £2,001.
So how did they find the glitch in her wiring? Because handing Sarah a new sales script obviously wasn't going to fix her amygdala.
They had to use the story of who to look beneath the business strategy. It required a lot of vulnerability to build trust, but when they dug into her narrative, they uncovered a deep psychological imprint from her childhood.
Right. This part of the notes really stood out. As a child, whenever Sarah had something of value, whether it was a treasured object, a sum of money, or even an accomplishment, it was taken away from her without her choice. If it held value, she lost control over it.
Now, connect that childhood trauma directly to the heart math biology we just discussed. Sarah's nervous system had taken those early experiences and written the strict, unyielding equation. Being resourced isn't safe.
Because having resources made her a target for loss. So if we look at the biology, when Sarah's income approached that £2,000 mark, she probably felt fine. But if she looked at a spreadsheet projecting a £10,000 month, her heart rate variability likely became entirely erratic. Her vagus nerve signaled her amygdala, and her brain literally perceived those projected profits as an impending trauma.
Exactly. Her surge protector tripped. Her system equated a full bank account with the physical danger of having her agency stripped away.
The realization the author shares here is just profound. Sarah was staying small enough to stay sovereign. She was unconsciously capping her income at £2,000 because that was the exact threshold where she could maintain control of her life without triggering that deep biological fear of loss.
It was her maximum safe voltage.
I love the phrase the text uses to describe this. She wasn't broken, she was patterned. That changes the entire conversation around personal growth. If you assume you're broken, you sit around waiting for someone to fix you, or you assume you're just inherently flawed.
Right.
But if you realize you are just patterned, like finding a glitch in a single line of code, you realize you have the agency to rewrite that code.
It completely removes the shame from the plateau. But it also presents the major challenge of the text. Since we're fighting deeply ingrained subconscious biological patterns, how do we actually rewrite the code?
Right. Because if I'm Sarah, forcing myself to cold call 100 people today clearly won't work if my surge protector is just going to trip tomorrow. So what is the solution?
The solution lies in a process the text calls the identity shift. The core directive is this. You don't force the numbers, you expand what feels safe.
Expanding safety. Instead of crushing goals, you're slowly upgrading the wiring. The notes break this process down into 3 specific phases, which they call the ROI of emotional mastery.
Yeah, the first phase is developing what they call wealth capacity. This is the foundational work of teaching the nervous system to stop equating wealth with instability or threat. It's the physical practice of noticing when the panic arises, when the HRV gets jagged, and using somatic tools or breath work to bring the system back into coherence before you make a business decision.
So wealth capacity is simply stopping the panic response so the prefrontal cortex can stay online.
Exactly. And once you've established that baseline capacity, you naturally transition into the second phase, the power shift.
How does the power shift look in day-to-day operations?
Well, when your internal state feels safe, your external behavior fundamentally changes. You begin pricing your services based on value rather than fear, because a rejection no longer feels like a survival threat.
That makes total sense.
You partner differently, setting rigid boundaries because you weren't desperate for validation. You stop over-delivering to the point of exhaustion just to prove your worth.
I've heard so many entrepreneurs talk about the terror of a successful launch. They finally have a $50,000 week, and instead of celebrating, they can't sleep for 7 days because they're convinced it was a fluke.
Oh, all the time.
Or the clients will all ask for refunds, or the tax authorities are going to come take it all.
And that is the exact lack of wealth capacity. The power shift is what happens when you normalize those larger numbers. You learn to tolerate having resources without your body sounding the alarm.
So what does this all mean? I mean, this eventually brings us to the third concept in this shift on uncompressed identity. The text makes a really beautiful point here. It argues that when you achieve this emotional mastery, you don't actually become someone new. You just become someone uncompressed.
It's an important distinction, you know. You aren't fabricating a new personality to match your new income bracket.
The analogy that comes to mind is an overstuffed suitcase. You know when you pack for a trip and you jam so much stuff into a tiny carry-on that you have to literally sit on it just to get the zipper closed. Everything inside is squished, wrinkled, and compressed into a tight, dense block.
A very stressful way to travel, by the way.
Right. Now, unzipping that suitcase doesn't magically generate new clothes. You aren't unpacking items you didn't already own. You're just finally giving the contents that were always there the room to breathe, to expand, and to return to their natural shape.
That connects perfectly back to our surge protector analogy. You aren't plugging in a different house, you've just upgraded the wiring so the system can handle the full current of who you already are without tripping the breaker. The talent, the intuition, the drive, just like Sarah's profound creativity, they were always there.
They were just compressed.
Yes, compressed by the biological fear of being resourced. When you remove the fear, the identity naturally expands to fill the space.
It's a massive relief to view growth this way. It isn't about constantly adding more skills or more hustle. It is about removing the artificial, unconscious limits we've placed on ourselves.
But that requires a fundamentally different type of work than just tweaking a marketing funnel. It requires deep introspection, radical honesty about your own patterns, and, frankly, a willingness to sit with the discomfort of expanding your safety zone.
Which brings us to the end of our deep dive today. I want to bring this all together for you. If you have been banging your head against an invisible ceiling, whether your number is 2,000, 20,000, or 200,000, feeling like you're doing all the right external things but getting nowhere, I want you to hear this loud and clear. Your immediate goal is not to work more hours.
No, definitely not.
It is not to send 50 more cold emails or rebuild your website or buy another software tool.
The work you need to do is internal, and the source text leaves us with a final, slightly uncomfortable exercise to begin upgrading your wiring. It's a provocative thought to mull over today. I want you to imagine earning significantly more than you do right now. Picture that new, ambitious number sitting in your bank account. And as you imagine it, pay attention to your body. What feels slightly uncomfortable about it?
Does your chest tighten? Do you feel a sudden flash of guilt about out-earning your peers? Or maybe a quiet dread about the responsibility it might bring?
Locate that specific discomfort, because that feeling is your doorway. It's the glitch in your code. You must sit with that discomfort and ask yourself the ultimate diagnostic question. Can I feel safe receiving more without losing myself?
Can I feel safe receiving more without losing myself? If you can answer yes to that, if you can establish that coherent biological frequency of safety, the text promises us that the income and the external success will naturally follow as a lagging indicator. Remember, you aren't broken. You are just patterned. And patterns can be rewritten.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive. If this conversation helped you identify your own invisible ceiling or gave you a new perspective on why you might be hitting the brakes, please take a moment to like, subscribe, and hit the bell notification. It ensures you never miss a future deep dive with us, and it helps us continue unpacking these vital insights for you. Until next time, take a close look at your own safety settings, and we will see you on the next deep dive.
So when Gina offered me the opportunity to do this, I jumped for it, because I think anything that you can do that is going to chip away at these limiting the beliefs of things that hold you back is really, really worth doing. So it's been a really lovely experience, and if anybody's a bit worried about it, just do it, because the opportunity to connect through havening is really, really powerful. It's really, really powerful.
But really helpful, I think, in terms of having that kind of guided process, just to kind of let the ideas and the feelings and the images flow, and then try and work out what it actually means afterwards, and to come up with, and it made intuitive sense. It's really, really helpful to then kind of have that debrief of, okay, what can we actually do with this stuff? Because That's where we tend to get stuck, is kind of like coming out of it going, oh, this is all some really interesting ideas and thoughts and feelings and images. But yeah, then, how can we actually harness them to do something different? And I think that's been really, really helpful in terms of clarifying really what I need to prioritize to go forward in a way that will deal with some of that stuff that came up.
I would like to point out that I'm actually a therapist myself, and sometimes therapists also need a therapist. So I was really stuck, and then one day a friend posted a link for Gina's wealth and money attracting short course, and I went, this sounds great, I'm just gonna book it. And I loved it so much. I really had an epiphany on that course, and it was only meant to be a demonstration, and yet it was really it just opened up possibilities that I was stuck before, and now like, ooh, I can use this to unstuck myself. I'm a great believer that when the student is ready, the teacher appears, and you appeared at the right time. That's all there is to it. So, if anybody is watching this video, it means Gina has appeared in your life. So please give it a try.
She walks where the sky meets the sea, a calm in the chaos, wild and free. The light wraps around her soul. She's ready